I'm 4 years old sitting in a military base. I remember vividly sitting there, and my dad's platoon is in this hallway, and they have their M16s apart, and they're cleaning them, and here I am 4 years old with a Q-tip and a handguard, thinking this is the coolest thing in the entire world, and all I talked about was being a Marine. That's all I wanted to do, and then eventually became wanting to be a cop. I wanted to work in a profession that serves the place I live, and I wanted to give my portion back to the community. And not to be cliche, it is a great place to live. I love this town. I have so much fun here. I'm glad that my kids go to school here. My kids love this city. So my drive that keeps me here is like, I feel like I get to be a part of keeping the city awesome.
Hello and greetings. This is Officer Andrew Kutchenriter, School Resource Officer with John Muir Middle School and employee of Wausau Police Department since 2020. I am here today to introduce the community at large to one of our detectives at the Wausau Police Department. We want to show you a little bit under the hood. This is Detective Dave Bertram. Dave, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, who you are, where you're from?
Sure. I just want to mention that is the most professional sounding voice I've ever heard you use, and I applaud you.
Well, there's more where that came from.
Yeah, I'm Dave Bertram. I've been with Wausau. It'll be, it's gonna be 9 years in June. In 21 days, it'll be 9 years with this department.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So, did 2 years at the State Patrol prior to that, and loving every minute of it.
Honestly, one of the reasons why I agreed to get behind the camera and interview you is because I do not know you well. I get along well with you, but I don't know you that well. Like, ultimately, what I was hoping to accomplish today was, find out more about you. Like, where take us all the way back to little Dave Bertram.
Oh, no.
Where are you from, man?
Well, I'm born and raised in Wisconsin. I was born in West Bend, Wisconsin, and my parents were very young, 19 and 18 when I was born. So it's been a wild ride. I'm probably one of the very few people in the world that can say I remember my dad's 25th birthday. So because they had a party, my dad. So a lot of things that had happened in my life that kind of got me where I went is truly because of my parents and my dad joining the Marine Corps. Two young kids out of high school, no jobs, got to feed a baby, pay the rent. So my father in the mid '80s joined the military and picked the Marine Corps, which led to us living all over the world. I lived in Japan for 4 years. Wow. I grew up with Marines. So that right there, that first 4.5 years of my life kind of set the tone, I think, for everything else. Because I'm 4 years old sitting in a military base, and I remember vividly sitting there, and my dad's platoon is in this hallway, and they have their M16s apart, and they're cleaning them, and here I am 4 years old with a Q-tip and a handguard, thinking this is the coolest thing in the entire world, and that set the road for Dave forever, because from that moment on, all I talked about, and you can ask my parents, all I talked about was being a Marine. That's all I wanted to do, and then eventually became wanting to be a cop. But I lived out in Japan for quite a while and came back to the U.S. and my dad became a recruiter, so we lived all over the state. Luckily, he was able to stay in Wisconsin, so I've lived in Beaver Dam, Sheboygan, back to West Bend. Kewaskum for a little while, all of that. So,
Very cool.
I spent the rest of my childhood from 5th grade on in West Bend.
Now, do you remember, during your childhood, do you remember any time, any part of your childhood just being abroad, like out of the state of Wisconsin or out of country? Or is that all kind of a blur for you?
Actually, I remember quite a bit. It surprises my parents still, because every once in a while we'll talk about the house in Japan, because we lived off base, so we actually lived among the Japanese, and I'm still at almost 40 now. I can still describe the layout of the house, and I remember the alley behind there, and I remember we went to Disneyland when I was in Japan. I don't know if you know that there's a Disneyland in Japan.
I think I had heard that. That's cool, though. That's really cool.
And apparently I was a celebrity. I remember going to Disneyland, and one of the only memories I have about that really is being in that in the boat, and they play the It's a Small World over and over until you go.
Yes.
I remember that, but my parents have showed me pictures, and like there's all these like Japanese girls that would come stand around this 3-year-old boy because I had blonde hair. And they just loved my blonde hair, and they loved my mom is blonde also. I'm not blonde anymore, but so my mom and I were always celebrities everywhere we went because we had blonde hair. But I remember going to Disneyland. I remember the base. The Marine Corps base was, I mean, you look back on it, and when you're 4, all these Marines seem like these old men, but in reality, they're 18, 19 years old, and I remember they were always so cool because they'd come over with like RC cars, and I got to play with the RC cars. And my parents being so young, and one of the only people that had children because they were so young, it was me and Marines. That's all I knew while we were over there. So I remember going a lot of places in Japan.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And so you mentioned that you grew up all throughout the state of Wisconsin. You mentioned that your dad was a recruiter for the Marines. What about your mom? What did your mom do to stay occupied?
Well, my mother worked a lot of different jobs, secretarial work, worked in fast food for a while. Quite frankly, Mom did everything she could to just keep helping with money and doing her thing. Both my parents worked my entire childhood. My mom never really settled on a career until probably, I can't remember how long she's been with the same company now for like 17 years. So and now she runs a dispatching unit for a trucking company.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so she helps manage that rather. But she's just everywhere. Odd jobs here and there,
Now, was it just you 3 growing up, or do you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I have a younger sister.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your sister. I mean, not specific details, but who's she?
Well, my sister is Stephanie, and she was born in Japan.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of cool. I've seen her birth certificate, and though she was born on a American base, because she was in Japan at the time, like she has Japanese writing and a dragon and stuff on her birth certificate, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So she was born there, and then so we're like 2.5 years apart in age, and always really close, especially because we kept moving. So like my little sister was kind of my buddy, and I was her buddy, and that kind of changed in high school. Teenagers, and we were always still close, but definitely lots of fighting and arguing.
Sure.
But as fate would have it, she went on to marry a Marine. So she's been married for, I think it was 12 years. They just celebrated a couple weeks ago on Memorial Day.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think, like me from the outside looking in, that helps me kind of understand a little bit better how you tick, because I think when I think Marine, a certain image kind of comes to mind, and then when I hear you were raised by both your parents who were very hard workers, you had a close relationship with your younger sister who went on to marry a Marine, it tells me that there's a lot of tradition in your background. And it tells me that you're from a family of really hard workers too. It sounds like.
I like to think so. Yeah.
The question I think I'd like to ask next is, so we're gonna get to your Marine, I guess your history, your service, but when do you think that seed was planted for you to consider law enforcement as a career?
Gosh, I think like most kids, you have this vision of like, I want to do this when I grow up. And as it started as a child, I grew up around movies like Lethal Weapon and, Magnum PI and all that, and you have this like, oh man, that's so exciting, car chases and arresting the bad guys. And as a child, that's where it started. Like, that looks like so much fun. And then as time went on and I got older and kind of understood the world better, and the desire, the passion still was there, but the interest became more like, I look back at one of the officers that I had in high school, one of our SROs, and he was just so cool. Like, he treated us like adults, and we, in high school, we treated us like adults, and like he would tell us stories about being a police officer, and never embellished it, never sold it like this is the greatest thing. I mean, this is an honest guy that'd be like, hey, it's hard work. You're going to be tired. You're going to be cold. You're going to be hot. But it's rewarding. Especially if you work where you live, and that kind of resonated with me. Like, looking at who do I want protecting my streets, and like looking out for my kids and my friends' kids, and so the thing kind of went from a childhood thought process of like, yeah, drive fast, take chances, have all this stuff, to more of like, I want to be a part of my community in a very real way and have a say in one form or another on how things happen in the community. Is it fun to drive fast? Absolutely. When that comes, and there's an adrenaline rush that comes with making an arrest or, tussling with somebody, and that's all well and good, but it more became like I wanted to work in a profession that serves the place I live, and I wanted to give my portion back to the community, so to speak. As cheesy as that sounds to some, that it's truly what it is. Like, I want to be a part of my community that way, and get to have the fun that comes with that sometimes, the excitement rather. So
sure, and I suspect that you mentioned how that might sound cheesy. I suspect that some listeners to the podcast, they're going to get used to hearing different sworn staff that get behind the mic say something very similar. That service is kind of at the root of why they decide to become a police officer, and it does sound cheesy, but knowing you and what I know about you, that all makes a lot of sense. So, Marines. You graduated high school. I'm sure you were a straight A student, as most Marines
absolutely.
and cops are.
Terrible student.
So, like, tell me about your decision to enlist in the Marines. Like, was that kind of preordained? Like, did you know, like, I'm not going to college right away? Or
no, it actually wasn't preordained.
No,
I wanted it. I wanted it so bad. And September 11th. Like all of us that were around at that time, I'll never forget it for a lot of reasons, more than just the fact that our country was attacked. I just happened to be sick that day. I was homesick with the flu. And I'm sure you can probably remember where you were. Yeah,
and I have a little bit of a memory of this story, but this is a good story. Let's hear this.
So I was homesick with the flu, and I was actually sick because there's still a level of argument with my mom that I was faking it that day.
Sure.
But I was homesick, and I'm sleeping, and my bedroom door flies open. It's mid-morning or whatever time that was, and my mother had come home from work very briefly. She throws the door open and she goes, "Get up, things are blowing up in New York." And I'm like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And okay, and I get up and I end up going downstairs and I turn the TV on and I pop it over to the news. And as I, it's all live at the time. As I turn it over, I watch the second plane go into the tower. And I was like, holy crap. So my father ended up coming home for lunch later that day, and I'm just glued to the TV watching the news.
And he's still a recruiter at that point, right?
No, he was out of the Marine Corps at that time. My father got out in 1993, I think it was.
Okay.
So at this time, my dad eventually got himself into, he's still in computers. He works for Dell, actually. But at the time, he was working for a small IT company in West Bend, and he came home, and I'll never forget. It's like my dad can predict the future in some ways. Like, he sat down, because I was a junior in high school, and I knew that I wanted to join. And I remember my father sitting on the couch across from me, and he points at the TV and he points at me and he goes, "You and your friends are going to fight this war."
Yeah.
And it was like, "You think we're going to war?" He's like, "Yeah, this is going to be war." And he goes, "And I would guess that this is going to be a long war." Weird, because it was 20 years worth after that between Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah.
So like many other young men and women at the time, like that incident was like, it solidified. Like, I'm going to go serve. I'm going to go fight, and all that. So interestingly enough, I want to be a Marine, like my dad and my uncles. And I have a long history of Marines in the family. We have a couple soldiers too. My grandfather was in the Army and stuff like that. My uncle was in the Marine Corps and fought in Nam. And so I'm going to do this. And I remember my dad going, well, I think you should talk to all the other branches and see what else is out there and decide what you want to do. Now, as a father...
That's good advice.
Well, as a father now, I get what he was doing. So I actually lied to my parents and told them that I talked to the other recruiters, but I only went to the Marine Corps recruiter, and they were more than happy to take this excited young man that all I wanted to do was this, that, and the other thing. So I lied to my dad, and I told him that I had talked to all these other recruiters, and sorry, Pop, you probably know this now. And I came back and said I wanted to join, and I was 17 at the time, or 17 and a half, and I begged my parents to sign me up early so I could go right away. And my mom in particular, but my mom really was like, absolutely not. When you're 18, you do what you're going to do, but we are not putting our signatures on that.
Sure.
So when the time came, I technically enlisted on December 4th of 2002, and I went into what's that called, the DEP program? No, not the DEP.
Yeah, delayed entry program. That's correct.
Getting old, I'm forgetting things. So I went into delayed entry program and began, physical fitness with those guys and helping recruit other kids from my class and stuff. And I remember that I wanted to be military police. That's what I wanted to do. I was like, well, I can get both worlds done with this. And my father, being the crafty devil that he is, he's like, I guess I should backtrack. So my wife and I met in high school. So we've been together since her sophomore year, my junior year of high school. And my father is like, if you join the Marine Corps and go active duty, you can't take your girlfriend with you. And I'm like, oh yeah, I suppose. And he's like, so, if you go reservist, you'll be home. And you can always go active duty. And he used to say, you can all go active duty.
Sure.
And like reservists, like, weekend warriors, you
very familiar.
You think back to the goobers in like Rambo First Blood, where they're up and they're chasing Rambo around, and like they're just a bunch of dorks. And I'm like, the reserves, that's disgusting. Yeah. Like, and then I found out there's no reserve unit for police, at least at the time. There might be now, but at the time there wasn't a reserve unit. So I'm like, well, what do I do? And I go back to my recruiter and we get to chatting, and he's like, well, you can go in the infantry. And I'm like, yeah, the infantry, that'd be cool. And what kind of jobs are in the infantry? So in the end, I ended up settling on the reserves because of a girl. And then I became a light anti-tank assaultman. And so it's an area of the infantry, but rockets. So for those that don't know, it's a SMAW, shoulder-fired multi-purpose assault weapon. It's the modern bazooka.
Got it.
So that's what I learned. I was going to go learn how to blow up tanks. So interestingly enough, many years later, I end up talking to my dad about why did you try to convince me to go reserves? And he admitted to me that I thought if you went to reserves, you wouldn't deploy. Joke's on him.
Yeah.
Because when I got back from all my training, the day I reported to my unit in Milwaukee, my first sergeant was like, well, welcome aboard. Hey, we're leaving for Iraq in 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah, the reserves were heavily tasked.
So a lot of us that served, I would say probably the first 10 years-ish of the 2000s, I mean, almost all the reserves deployed at one time. When it was all said and done, I spent more time on my contract as an active duty Marine than I did as a reserve. So my father had this great plan. I'm going to keep my son home and change his whole idea of what he wants to do in the military so he doesn't deploy. And then I deployed twice.
Well, and both deployments for you were they both Iraq? I know one for sure was, and we've talked about that a little bit in the past.
Yeah, both were Iraq. I went over for Operation Iraqi Freedom 2, so that was fall of 2004 into spring of 2005. So my battalion was there in support of the Fallujah offensive. So we didn't fight in Fallujah. Our units fought in outlying areas.
That'd be like your Haditha and things like that.
So we were in a place called Yusufia. There's
I've heard of
Yusufia,
Yusufia.
Mamadiya, and Lutafia. It's now known as the Triangle of Death. It was one of the hottest spots in Iraq at the time for IEDs, snipers, things like that. So it was intense. We got assaulted at one point. So our unit kind of made some history. We were one of I think the first reserve unit to have our own area of operations since Vietnam. So our battalion actually managed an entire AO, which isn't very common for a reserve unit. And then when Phantom Fury was going down, the mission to retake Fallujah, AIQ, or Al Qaeda in Iraq, had formed quite a large group to assault our unit in the hopes to break through and bring supplies to the fighters in Fallujah. And we found out through intel later that they had chosen our unit because we were reservists. So they figured that we weren't as well trained and we wouldn't fight as hard. They were wrong. So it was a very interesting first deployment. And then the second deployment was also in Iraq, and I served. It's weird because we served in Fallujah for a very brief bit, and we were on Checkpoint 5, which was the checkpoint that led to Blackwater Bridge. Remember the Blackwater incident? I do. So a couple of years after Blackwater happened, I was a part of the unit that ran the checkpoint for that bridge for a very brief bit. And then our battalion was retasked, and we went out and supported operations south of Fallujah, just outside of Ramadi in Habaniya. And Habaniya had a huge Air Force base and stuff like that. And I ended up with a platoon out on a FOB, called a Forward Operating Base called 569. And so we ran missions out of there and supported the local police.
Okay.
It was very different. You know, the first deployment was definitely like legitimate run and gun, dirty, ugly stuff. And the second deployment, we like to joke that we got paid to lift weights and hang out with the Iraqis.
Sure.
Which was cool. It was a much easier deployment and a very different deployment. So,
well, and as you and I both know, I mean, you described two very different experiences, but I don't think it should be left unsaid that neither deployment was easy. I mean, you're leaving family.
Oh,
you're
no.
leaving comforts of home. You have to fight malaise and boredom. Yeah. With one deployment maybe, whereas the other, I mean, you're constantly on edge, and you're still on edge in deployment number 2. Like, you still have to worry about incoming regularly, striking your fob or what have you, and like it's not easy either way.
No, I mean, and we lost our company alone lost 5 guys on the first tour, and then on the second tour we lost 2. So even though, like, I didn't fight at all on the second tour, but a couple of my buddies were in the wrong place at the wrong time and drove over some unexploded ordnance, and so both deployments were rough that way. And you're away from home. One of my good friends on that deployment, Brent Foltman, his wife delivered their first child while he was away, and he got a satellite phone, and they had a cell phone on in the hospital room, and he got to listen to all of that. I mean, and I couldn't imagine that. I mean, I was married at the time, but I didn't have kids yet, and I couldn't imagine being a dad and 8,000 miles away, and that's happening. Like his first child, and he can't be there. So there was a lot of. I mean, that was like that for everybody. It was. Mm-hmm. It was very different. That moment stands out for me. I just remember how emotional he was, and like he came out, and we're all standing around like, yeah, when we knew that baby was healthy and mom was healthy and stuff. And
well, and as a part of the Marine Corps Reserves, like I was active duty in the Army, and a lot of the people that I served with are from Lake Charles, Louisiana, Sacramento, California, all over the world.
Country.
Well, yeah. Well, sometimes the world too.
Well, it depends. Yeah.
The thing. So first of all, thank you so much for sharing what you've shared, and thank you for your service. I have great admiration for the Marine Corps, and I have an even greater admiration now as I'm as I am 40 for the things that you and other reservists have done, because I mean, you're serving with people that they might not necessarily be your next door neighbor,
Right.
but they might live a county over, or they talk like you, they grew up just like you. Like these are for all intents and purposes, these are your neighbors you're serving with, and your neighbors that you're losing in combat.
It is a very different experience. My best friend joined with me. We went to boot camp together. We ended up in the same unit, and then we ended up in the same squad. So he and I mean, we've been friends since we were little kids, and I never in a million years thought he was going to be a Marine. I don't think he expected to be a Marine. In fact, he joined before me because his mom and dad signed him in at 17 and a half, and he rubbed it in. And he was part of the reason why when I made the change to reserves, that I went assaultman, because that's what he picked.
Sure.
So I mean, we're still best of friends to this day. He lives down in Partyville area and stuff like that. But yeah, we to your point, we're all together. My second tour, I was an NCO at the time. I got promoted to corporal, and we're deploying. And I'll never forget coming on to our drill deck, getting ready to leave in a couple of months, and lo and behold, there's a guy standing on the quarter deck, guy by the name of J.J. Hughes, and guy I went to high school with. Didn't even know he joined. Had no idea he joined, and he knew what platoon I was in, and he's still serving today. He's in the I think the National Guard now as a medic, and he flies around on Blackhawks.
Very cool.
And stuff like that when
very dangerous.
Yeah, but I mean, how cool is that, and how weird is that? But it was another stressor. Like I'd have to worry about, you worry about your boys and when you're out and stuff, but there's an extra level of like, I went to school with these guys. I know these guys' parents. You know? So very different experience. Sometimes there's still a little trash talk that'll, among branches like we do, and then as soon as someone's like, well, what unit were you in? I'm like, well, I was with Milwaukee 224, and they're like, reservist, and I'm like, hey man, we did our share in the sand. So
yeah, well, thank you for opening all of our eyes to what you went through in the reserves and what life was like for you. So I really appreciate kind of what you've shared with us about your time in the service. We've had some flashbulb moments, Dave. I guess tell us something. Tell us a story from the Marines. Something we'll really get into.
Something fun. We're all practical jokers. I mean, I know you served in the Army and deployed and all that. I know you. Young men have nothing better to do.
No, we don't.
So it becomes a game of messing with each other.
Yes, it does.
Taking it to whatever limit you can take it to.
Okay.
And there's some stories that I can't share on a podcast of goofy things we've done, but what I can share was probably the greatest practical joke I personally have ever pulled on anybody. I get a care package from a name I don't recognize.
All right, what's a care package?
So I got when you're on deployment, you can get these. People will send you packages that are usually filled with like magazines, DVDs, food, deodorant, whatever.
No bake brownies.
Big homemade brownies. All that stuff.
No bake brownies.
Oh, no bake brownies.
Yeah, because they travel better.
Well, my mother-in-law it makes like the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. The problem is the snail mail really is the snail mail in the military. So by the time I got them, they were stale.
You don't worry about that.
But they were still like the greatest cookies ever. So
sure they are.
So I get this care package from a person I don't know, which isn't totally uncommon. Kids, classes will sometimes send care packages out and stuff. But what I did recognize was the last name, which was Patterson.
Okay.
And I served with a Greg Patterson. And I believe he's still a firefighter down in the Milwaukee area now. But I'm like, there's no way this is like, why would Greg's family send me anything? So long and short of it is it was filled with like beef jerky and Doritos and stuff. And then there was a letter in there, and it was from his uncle. And his uncle sent me a school photo of Greg when he was in 8th grade. Braces and all. Yeah.
Small world.
And he goes, I found out that you're one of Greg's buddies. I thought maybe you could find something good to do with this. Here's his picture. So
awesome.
So what I did was, with the help of a buddy of my buddy AJ, actually the guy I was talking about that we grew up together, he and I went into the command center and got a hold of a computer that had a printer, and I produced missing child advertisement with his picture on there, and I put his real like height and weight of like his time as an adult, but there's this picture of this braced kid on there. And, please contact 2nd Platoon, 224, if you find this child, Corporal Greg Patterson, blah, blah, blah. And I made hundreds and hundreds of copies and put them inside of Humvees, Porta-Johns. He was up in Ramadi. So
maybe I found Greg because I was in Ramadi.
So all over the place. And only one other person truly knew about this, and we never told anybody else. And so it was really satisfying to see a Humvee from like an Army unit that I'd never been a part of, and I could see Greg's missing milk carton thing inside their Humvee window and stuff like that. So I don't believe they ever found him. But
what an outstanding use of
taxpayer money and money.
Yes.
Yeah. So our last day in country, we're all sitting. We have all of our sea bags, all of our personal bag items and stuff. We're all sitting in a row waiting to get on a truck to go to the airport to leave the country. Mm-hmm. And I walked over by my buddy and I sat down next to him and we're kind of chit-chatting. I reach in my pocket and I pulled out the photo. And he looks at me. He's like, "You son of a..." So he's like, I had no idea who it was. There was other people.
Oh, man, I cannot imagine the payoff.
They used to come out to our FOB because he and I were the same platoon, but we got split up for the deployment. So we would see each other on occasion, and he'd be at our FOB, and it would get brought up the missing kid, and no one gave it away. I made it so that was like
amazing.
That was a good like 4-month prank that went on. And
that's amazing. Well, oh my gosh. I wish I could have been a part of your unit at that time. I would have eaten that up. That's awesome. So, Dave, being a reservist, I know, you're going to have a transition out of your reserve service, but I also know that you still have your civilian life while you're in the reservists.
Yep.
Or I should say while you're in the Marine Corps Reserve. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, what were you doing while you were in the reserves? How did you transition out of your reserve service?
So kind of from beginning to end, I graduated high school June 7th of 03 and July 7th of 03. 30 days to the day, I was standing on the yellow footprints in San Diego. So I joined. I actually ended up fracturing my leg while I was in there. I guess I don't have it anymore, but I used to be really thin. I was a skinny twig. I went to boot camp at 6'3" and 170 pounds. Yeah. I was a really little guy.
You're smaller than I was.
Yeah?
Yeah, 6'2", 169.
Yeah. My body, and I played sports. I was an active kid. I played like competitive paintball and stuff, but my body couldn't take the pounding of the running and the weight and stuff. So eventually I got a stress fracture in my shin. And which caused me to go into a rehabilitation platoon for a little while. So I ended up doing a little over 6 months of boot camp, which is twice as long as it's supposed to be.
Yeah, kind of a miserable existence.
And then there were some huge California fires going on at the time. So around that Christmas, I did a little over a month of recruiter's assistance. So I got to go home and help the recruiters for a while.
Sure.
So I guess the point of all that is I had this like extended period of the beginning of my time in the military. Mm-hmm. And then I go to School of Infantry, which is like 2 months. And then finally I get to go home and I reported to my reserve unit, and that's when they were like, hey, we're going to be building up to go to Iraq in like 2 months. Mm-hmm. So when I left for boot camp, I was working at Blockbuster, if you remember Blockbusters.
Love Blockbuster. Yeah. Second only to Family Video, of course. Oh,
man. So I went back to that job for a couple of months.
Okay.
And then my orders came through and we deployed. So that was an entire year. We do build up training and then we deploy, we come back. And then I had an opportunity to stay on active duty for a while, which is good pay. Compared to what I would have been making is at Blockbuster or whatever. So I stayed on active duty for a while and just worked out of the reserve unit. and until school started. So then I went to college, and so I left active status back to reserve status. I went to college at UW Washington County in West Bend, and then I also worked at Blockbuster full time, and I got promoted to shift manager. So I was working that job, training on the weekend, once a month on the weekends, and then going to school full time. So I did that for about a year, and then a small deployment opportunity came up to go to Africa. So I did a deployment, Operation Shared Accord, which was a mostly humanitarian mission and a training mission. The bummer about that was, even though it was only like 6 or 7 weeks deployment, it was landing like right at the beginning of my next semester, and so I ended up skipping a semester of college, did that deployment. Really cool experience. Had a lot. We went to Niger, Africa, and it's one of the smallest nations and like the second poorest nation in the world.
Is that the northwest part of Africa?
It's like dead center on the northern. Yeah, it's right on the edge of the Sahara, by like Chad and all that.
Okay.
And they used to be a French colony, so their primary language there is French. Cool people. What a great culture. Had a lot of. It was a really cool experience. I'm glad that I missed that semester of college to do that.
It's almost like a semester studying abroad for you.
In a way, yeah. It was a really neat experience. So I did that, came home, and went back to work at Blockbuster because I was only gone for like 6 weeks, 6 or 8 weeks. I can't remember how long it was. But then, so it was 2006, and then continued school, and then I got a new job. I worked as an armored car driver for a while, which was pretty cool. I serviced ATMs in Milwaukee, continued going to school. I got married during that time to my high school sweetheart. And then when the orders came again to deploy, I deployed again, was gone for a year and some change to Iraq, came back again, went back on reserve status, continued school, and then right around the time my contract came to an end, my wife was pregnant, and I was still working. So I had long left Blockbuster, and that armored car gig was conflicting with school. So I was selling cell phones for Radio Shack at the time, trying to pay the bills and exiting the military. And even though I had chunks of time with being a reservist, like there's still just like so much of my 6 years had been on active duty and always just live, breathe Marine Corps, and now I got a baby coming and all that. And I wanted to be a cop. I was really wanting to do this, what I was going to school for. And, I was one of the other 15,000 veterans that were trying to apply to be cops. And many departments won't even look at you if you're not certifiable, right?
Correct.
So, you got to be certifiable, you got to have so many college credits, and then you got to have completed an academy. And I'm a young married guy with a kid on the way, no real stable income. My education's not finished. I had the credit requirements, but I couldn't be certifiable. I couldn't afford to put myself through an academy at $2,500 at the time to do that, and can't work. So it was time to get a big boy job. And so as I exited the Marine Corps completely and went to an active reserve, I got hired with the Department of Corrections for Wisconsin. I don't know if you know that.
No, I had no clue.
So I went in and became a correctional officer, and I served in Kettle Moraine Correctional. It was a medium security prison. And I have an uncle that retired a number of years ago as a captain for the DOC, but he had been with Fox Lake Correctional as an armory sergeant for like 25 years. So he really encouraged me, like, hey, this is a really good place that pays decent. You're going to work your butt off, but it's secure and safe, and a safe job that's not going to go anyplace. You need this job. And so I took that on, and it paid well enough that my wife got to become a stay-at-home mom, and that was cool. And I still tried to continue some of my education, but I kind of let go of the cop dream at that time. Like I was like, I still can't get myself. When am I going to leave? I can't leave the I can't leave work to go to the academy. And it felt like every department that I was looking at didn't want to pay for you to go to the academy.
Yeah, it kind of makes it prohibitive when you have to pay your way through school.
Yeah.
And did you have like, this is kind of an aside question, but did you have access to like educational benefits from your time in the Marine Corps Reserve?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
They paid everything.
Okay, good.
The post 9/11 bill had come through during my time. So I started on the Montgomery GI Bill, which has got a really, a limited fund and some restrictions. And then Wisconsin, I think it was under Governor Doyle, all that changed. They got the post 9/11 bill for Wisconsin, which paid, as long as I was going full time, they paid all my tuition and reimbursed a certain chunk of money for books and paid me a stipend every month. So that also helped us.
Yeah, that helped.
For a while.
But you still have, you've got bills to pay and growing family and everything. It makes it difficult to break into law enforcement. So you're working corrections.
So working corrections, and I would occasionally put applications out to different agencies just to try it. Like I put in for Milwaukee. I ended up on their waiting list for like 2 years, and then I actually got a call. I got offered. So I guess how that all I was successful in corrections. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people more than working with the people I worked with. It was a lot of hours. I mean, a lot of overtime. A lot of overtime, and that was during that really rough transition from like the Act 10 came through, and a lot of people retired early, and some people quit. And I mean, I was putting in 60 hours a week. I was running ragged. So I took a promotion while I was there, and my sister and her husband were working for an insurance company, and it paid more than I was being paid as a correctional officer, and it was way easier on the body and the mind.
Sure.
And they just encouraged, like, hey, apply, just see how it goes. So I did. So I get my promotion offered as to become a sergeant. That same week, I get a call from Milwaukee PD, offered me a position as a cop, and I get a call from this insurance company offering me a position up in Green Bay. And so I go to my wife, and we discussed it thoroughly, and what ended up happening is, at the time, if you worked in Milwaukee, you had to live in the city limits, which means my kids were going to have to go to school in Milwaukee, and nothing against Milwaukee, but I didn't want...
It's not for everyone.
I didn't want to grow up, my kids to grow up in Milwaukee. I wanted to live outside of Milwaukee, and so as parents, we kind of made that decision of like, no, I had to turn them down. And then I made the decision to take the job in Green Bay. Get paid better. In fact, it paid well enough that I bought my first house.
Okay.
So we moved out of a 2-bedroom apartment into a 4-bedroom home in Green Bay. It was cool. I found out very quickly that, I don't like working in a cubicle which is funny now, right? But because my office is in a cubicle now, but all I do is a cubicle work, and it was very boring work and very monotonous, and just, I was almost instantly miserable when I started that job.
What year is this?
So this is 2000. This is 2012.
Okay.
So 2012. Yes, 2012.
Yeah,
just
sorry
before
to
my
make you
son.
think
No,
about
no,
it, but-
2012, 2013-ish.
Okay.
And one day I was still doing my training for my new job, and one day, just on a whim, I'm like, I'm gonna go look at WileyNet and just see what cop jobs are out there. Like, I'd given up on it. Like, I hadn't applied for a police officer job in 2 years at this point. And this Wisconsin State Patrol was hiring, and they had a whole piece on there like, all you need is 60 credits. We'll take care of everything else, essentially. I'm like,
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah.
All right, screw it. So I applied. Like, thought nothing of it. Just like, I'll apply. If it happens, it happens. Like 2 weeks later, a recruiter calls me, and she's like, hey, we reviewed your resume and stuff, and we're really interested in you. Would you be interested in joining the next class, which was like 6 months away? And I'm like, yes, please.
Bing pot.
So wham, bam, I took the test, the interviews, the physical, all that. I knocked it all out of the park.
Nice.
They gave me an offer. They gave me an offer to be hired. And so now is the big decision. I go to my wife and I said, so here's the deal. I've been offered a position with the State Patrol. Here's the kicker. Here's the risk. you have to like the State Patrol has some of the best training in the United States and for law enforcement. The Wisconsin State Patrol doesn't mess around. You have to hold a certain grade point average. You have to hold a certain physical fitness requirement, all that. Mm-hmm. There is a possibility that I get washed out. And if I get washed out unemployed. So it was a gamble. The other gamble was there's no guarantee that you're going to work where you want to work. They go by availability in the state. So we're living in Brown County now in Green Bay, and I'm like, we could end up in Milwaukee. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to be. So, and my wife, being the awesome woman that she is like, this is what you've always wanted. It's worth the risk. So I resigned from my insurance job, and I went to the State Patrol in October of 2013. Wow. And I made it, obviously. So really cool experience. So I came out in the spring of 14 as a Wisconsin State Trooper. Brown County was picked by somebody else in my class because we went by ranking, and I kind of ranked in the middle.
Okay.
And then they go by the ranking. So, and the class did really well. Like out of the 32 that graduated, I was right in the middle of that. I was 20. It goes around 20 or 19 or 20. I can't remember. Okay. But out of that group, the difference from first place to 32nd place was a difference of like 1.5% on the grade point scale. Like everyone did really well. Like we were all like A students essentially. So I was hoping to get Fond du Lac, which was much closer to home of West Bend and close enough to Green Bay that I could make that drive pretty easily if I needed to until like I had a chance to transfer. Yeah, none of that came down. So by the time it got to me, it was like Kenosha, Racine, La Crosse, Madison, so Dane County, or this place I'd never heard of, Marathon County. And I'm like, Marathon County, where the hell is that? And I look it up, middle of the state, and I'm like, oh, look, there's like no cities in this. Oh, Wausau, where's Wausau? So we're looking at all this. So I went to my wife and I was like, your call. Do you want to live up north? This is up north to me. I know that people that have grown up in Wausau are like, no, up north is past Highway 8.
Well, and you saw my eyebrows. That was because I was shocked that you hadn't heard of Wausau, which is the center of the universe.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Now, it's like now that I've been here for 10 years, I'm like, how do you not know where Wausau is? Yeah. But yeah, I was like, so I went to my wife. I'm like, do you want to live up north on the west side, or do you want to up north, the west side, or do you want to live down south by Milwaukee? Because that's where we're at. And I said, you pick whatever you want. You think you'll be the happiest with. She said, let's move up north. So I picked Marathon County, and so from the time I bought my home in Green Bay to the time I bought my house in Wausau was less than a year. And because I used
that went fast.
Yeah, because I used a military loan, I couldn't close on my new home until I closed on my old house sale. So within a week, we switched houses and switched loans and all that. And I ended up living in Wausau, which I never in a million years thought I would be a Wausau cop. I figured I was going to retire trooper.
Right.
And loved it. State Patrol was great. Great people. Very interesting job. But what kind of ended up happening was 95% of what you do as a trooper is traffic. I mean, that's what they do. We work the highways, and I very quickly decided I didn't want to chase taillights my entire career.
Well, and you don't like cubicles, and it seems to me like if you're working for the State Patrol, if you're working traffic 95% of the time, you're kind of in your little law enforcement
cubicle. You're in your mobile
cubicle
office all the time.
95% of the time, yeah.
And again, I have nothing but great praise for the Wisconsin State Patrol. What a fantastic organization. I loved it. I'm honored to be able to claim that hat. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to do other things, and I became kind of friends with Jake Chittum, who's a lieutenant now for us. And we used to, there's an ongoing joke. I was known as the city trooper. I was the only trooper that would come and work inside of Wausau, and I would.
Gee, I wonder why.
So I would work traffic inside the city at night and stuff like that, and I got to know some of the Wausau officers, and I got to know quite a few of the Marathon County deputies. I love that organization too, and I was interested in both. Wausau was hiring, and Lieutenant Chittum sold it, baby. This is the greatest place on earth, and I'll never look back. I applied, and I got selected, and I got hired in 2015 with the city, and I love it here. It'd be 9 years now in a couple of weeks, and I came in on a patrol level, and now I've made it to detective, and it's great. So that's my whole trip.
Yeah, you let us under the hood. I've got a much better understanding of who you are and what your background is. I mean, you've had like a really serpentine route to getting into law enforcement. The saying around here is that we hire for character and train for skill. Mm-hmm. I think based on what you've told me about your upbringing and your background, it seemed to me that Wausau PD had character in spades with you.
Oh yeah, it still does.
What keeps you going? Like why has it now almost been 9 years? Like what drives you to continue here?
I think it's two things. On a bit of a selfish level, it's the people I work with. I have fun with the group of guys and gals I work with. Like, it's just, we are a family, and that's something that I loved about the military. And I feel like I get that here. I mean, I think you would agree, like, overall, like,
wholeheartedly.
What a great group of people. On the other level of this is, like, Wausau's my home. And I am now, as a Wausau officer, I am working the streets that my children play in and where I live. And I've come to, I mean, this is home now. I grew up in West Bend, and my wife and I just made a trip back to West Bend not too long ago for a family event. And we're driving through the town, and I said, doesn't it feel weird being here? Like, this isn't home anymore. Wausau is home. This is my home. I've truly come to love this city. Like, and not to be cliche, it's just it is a great place to live. I love this town. I have so much fun here. I'm glad that my kids go to school here. My kids love this city. So my drive that keeps me here is like, I feel like I get to be a part of keeping the city awesome. I would argue that our department overall is pretty well liked among the citizens of this city, and we have great technology and great equipment and great training. I mean, I talk to some of my friends that are cops in other agencies like Milwaukee, who is such a big town and has so many police officers they have to take care of. They also have great training and equipment, but sometimes the amount of training I talk about people that I get, they're like, how do you guys do that?
For one, I feel like I would get lost in an agency like Milwaukee. It's hard to stand out, and it's hard to feel like you're making an impact, making a dent in your community.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And again, they're a great organization. I know plenty of friends of mine that work for them, but it is big. I mean, I don't know how many times I'll bump into a Wausau or a Milwaukee captain or whatever that'll come up to a cross stream like, hey, do you know so-and-so? Nope, I have no idea who that is. And my friend has been there for 15 years. But it's just because they're so big, We're here, like, we know each other. We're kids get together. We go to baseball games together. It's so all of that is kind of the drive. Like, I'm happy to come to work at this department every day and to work in the city and play in the city. Like, it's cool.
Well, and you've worn a lot of different hats with the Wausau Police Department. I mean, I really enjoy having you as a DAT instructor at the department, and I feel like you serve that role really well. But I mean, before working for the bureau, I mean, you were our card officer. You were an FTO, and I think that goes to show, like, just how far your training and upbringing can bring you. And I know, like, I would imagine you've got some things planned for the future, right? Yeah.
Well, so to that point, like, that was one of my big draws to this department was opportunities. Not that there isn't opportunities in the state patrol, but there are less. You have promotions and you have a couple special teams you could go do, but when I come to the city, like, I came here as a patrol officer, and within a couple of years, I was a field training officer. I became a DAT instructor, defense and arrest tactics instructor. I've been on multiple committees for the department that, things that awards committee, we'll do votes for officers for their awards and things like that.
On some of the equipment that we have too, I know you've had an input on some of the equipment that we have access to with like the less lethal launcher and things like that.
Yes, the rubber batons. I was handed the responsibility a couple years ago to take over our less lethal program for ordering our pepper spray, and I put a proposal in to change the type of pepper spray we use, which happened. So we're on a new OC.
That's really cool.
Yeah. My input has been asked a few times for certain things on the tactical side of the house in terms of sights for the rifles that we have. There was an argument when we were going to get rid of shotguns that I was a part of. I actually was on the side of keeping them, but it's another thing. And not just me. I mean, they're coming to many officers with tactical backgrounds and stuff and getting our opinions. A lot of veterans that had used some of this equipment in a different environment, how did this perform and stuff like that. So there was plenty of vets that were asked. So I just was one of those, not like they just came to me.
Sure, yeah.
But what I appreciated about it was that this department took in account officers' experiences outside the agency and asked our thoughts on it, which was something that really I've always liked about this place is they'll come and talk to you and ask you like, hey, have you ever had this experience? What are your thoughts on that? So yeah, I've gotten to be part of that. I got to be a big part of the discussion for the CART program when they were doing the crisis assessment response team. And
that I'd like to hear more about because I don't know a lot about that. And I remember coming across you in my time as a probation agent when you were the CART officer. I guess talk to us a little bit about how that all panned out.
Yeah, so my involvement kind of started on the road as a patrol officer. I went to a call of a suicidal veteran. And the long and the short of it, it was a Marine that had gotten back from Afghanistan not too long before this incident. And he had gotten intoxicated, and he had loaded a rifle and put it under his chin and then fell asleep. So the call came in as like this very dangerous call, and this veteran, and there was a kid in the room sleeping with them. So it became a very serious, like tactical situation to get in there without anybody getting hurt. Mm-hmm. And we were very successful. We were able to sneak in. He was unconscious from being intoxicated, and we got the rifle away from him. We got the kid out of there and woke him up, and he became very emotional. He was just having a hard time, had seen his bunch of buddies killed and been in some horrible incidents in Afghanistan and all that. And my friend Peter Fish, who's now a lieutenant, Pete's also a Marine Corps veteran. Pete's also a Purple Heart recipient. He was wounded in Iraq. And so the three of us kind of engage in conversation, and we went from this very emotional, suicidal moment to ending the call with this guy kind of laughing and like agreeing that like to go get help, and a lot of that came from Pete and I being able to relate, and Pete and I kind of had this light bulb of like, wow, like there's so many of us out there, and I kind of spearheaded putting feelers out to the PD like, hey, are there any veterans here, whether you're a combat vet or doesn't matter, any veterans here that would be interested in being like on a call roster to help out with veteran calls? And it was an immediate success. Just about every single vet in the department was like, yeah, put my name on there. And that was kind of the beginning of it. Yeah. And then when the crisis assessment response team became a thing that the command staff was talking about, that was one of the things that I used because only a few of us applied for it. I mean, it's a tough job, and I mean, it's an emotionally draining job, and only a few people showed interest in it. And it was one of the things I put forth in my interview was like, hey, I've already started some of this with veterans. What a great platform to launch off of this, to further that initiative, as well as kick off this mental health team, where we pair an officer in conjunction with the county, a pair deputy, and then also an officer with mental health clinicians. And so that was kind of like, I think my my nugget to add in there was the veterans work, and then I became the first cart officer for Wausau, and I did that for 4 years.
And that was almost half of your time as an officer here at the department. And I remember you telling me in passing before we recorded this podcast, when you started here, you did not see yourself stepping into any sort of role like that. It seemed to me like you would kind of seen what the detectives were doing very early on in your career, and you thought, why are you nuts? Now you're a detective, right?
Yeah. Well, and so I remember coming in here as a new guy, and I don't remember why, but I had a conversation with Detective Seiler, who's now Captain Seiler.
Yeah.
And we were chit-chatting about something or another. I was only here for maybe a month or two at the time. And I asked him, what case are you working on? And he gave me this gist of this, really dry, uninteresting case about fraud. And, an important case, but I'm looking at the steps he's doing and the type of work, and I'm like, forget that. That is a boring, I don't want to do that. I'll never be a detective, And, I love the road. I miss the road. The road's a good time. It's different every day. It has its boring moments. It has its exciting moments. It's just, you're never doing the same thing every day on patrol. And I loved it. And I was like, I'm going to be a patrol officer forever. And then I had the opportunity to do CART. And CART is where I started gaining an understanding and an appreciation for detective work. And as a CART officer, I worked with everybody. Patrol, detectives, I worked with fire department, county, I was everywhere. And I had an opportunity as a CART officer. I had the flexibility to occasionally assist if they needed more help on a scene. So I ended up at a shooting. Somebody was injured in an alleyway, and nobody died, thankfully, but there was someone that got shot and was injured, and they needed the scene secured very quickly. While they were calling, it was after hours. I was working that night, so I ended up assisting on this investigation as just an extra body. And I watched Lieutenant Kolb, who's now retired, interview a guy, a suspect, and just listening to how he was talking to him and the way the interview went, it was so cool. Just the way he talked and the way he managed that conversation and notes and all that. And eventually the guy just straight up was like, yeah, I did it. And then I ended up at the scene, and I was watching detectives, take measurements and photographs. And I started realizing holy cow, there is way more to detective work than just sitting at your desk. And quite frankly, not that I'm so old, but I'll be 40 in November, and I feel it in the joints, and the military put a good workout on my body. I'm sure you can relate and appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I kind of had this realization that physically I'm becoming less effective on patrol, and I don't want to be a broken old man when I retire. So that was part of it, but then seeing the intricacies of the detective bureau kind of led to my excitement to look into it, and I applied. I actually applied to be a detective 3 times. It's a very competitive process.
Yeah.
And, it took me 3 times a charm. And I was selected for detective 2.5 years ago, and I got to tell you, I love it. It is such a satisfying job. I still get to occasionally go do fun patrol stuff, run around with the officers, and but one thing about patrol is you don't get to keep your cases a lot of times. I mean, would you agree?
Right.
Patrol officers are the backbone of this department for a lot of reasons, and one of the bummers of being a patrol officer is you may get into a case that you become emotionally invested in, and I want to solve this case, but you can't. And
it's not, don't have that time.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with talent or incompetence. Nothing. It has to do with patrol is needed elsewhere all the time. So many cases that you find your connection to and you want to work, you're basically forced to hand your case off to a detective often.
Right.
So I find satisfaction in getting to see the outcomes of those cases. And I do my best to keep in contact with all the officers, like, hey, this is where we're at on this, because if it wasn't for patrol officers' initial work, I'd have no work, So, and my hope is also, besides just keeping that relationship with my peers, to let them know what's going on, my hope is also that it'll encourage others to want to be a detective someday, because it's a really cool job. It's also a really sucky job sometimes. The things that we have to investigate are often awful. I mean, you're not making contact with police because you're having a good day, So
Right.
But what I think I like about it more than anything is the fact that it's always different, and it's a puzzle, and you really got to look at every case in all of its intricacies and find the missing pieces.
Right.
So it's just a more detailed look at what we do with cases, and I get to see all the way to the end.
Yeah. It's because on patrol, I mean, we're establishing probable cause and everything, but I mean, you really do the nuts and the bolts of the work, along with like the DA's office, of establishing beyond a reasonable doubt,
100%,
or clearing someone that might have been arrested with probable cause or what have you. And you work really closely with the victims sometimes and witnesses, and I can understand why you'd find your work really rewarding now.
Yeah, it's a hard job at times. I had a case that I had gotten early on in my detective time that went to trial recently, and I felt that I had the right stuff to prove the guilt of the suspect, and in the end, a jury decided that was not the case, and which is why we have the justice system that we have,
right.
And what's interesting is some of the things that I got knocked on the stand. I mean, you want to talk about eating humble pie, sit on a stand and testify, and then when you start having an attorney start poking holes in your work, and you go, oh man, I should have done this differently, That's something I didn't expect as a detective, in that you don't do as often as a patrol officers still testify, obviously, but you go under a greater scrutiny, and because of the amount of detail that you have to put into these cases, and it's definitely trial by fire. You learn a lot. I mean, you always learn more when you make a mistake, So detective work really makes you look at cases differently, and you think of things that you might not think of when you're on the road, because on the road you get your probable cause stuff, maybe make an arrest or make a referral. But when it gets to us, we got to look at this and go, okay, either we clear this person, or let's say we don't clear them. I got to think of the 500 other things that a defense attorney might want to talk about or dig into on the stand. Some things that I might feel are like, that's not very important, but it becomes important. So
absolutely.
As you have those rough days in court, you start to go, okay, well, the next case like that, I'm going to do this. So it's you're constantly learning. I would argue there's no detective that's like, I got this every single day of the week and twice on Sundays. You just can't, because you never know what you're going to see in court. You never know what witness is going to climb out of, or what piece of evidence is going to come in. You get a digital return on a cell phone or a computer and stuff, and you think that you're going to get this return, but you get a different return.
Well, and you mentioned that like continuous learning aspect of your job, and I think what the detectives really bring to patrol officers is you help us to become more efficient in developing like that initial investigation and considering alternative routes for investigating situations, because I mean the system works the way it does for a reason. It's been that way for a long time, and like you talked about the case that you had been working where the suspect was found by the jury not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is justice, but our job is not sloppy justice. Our job is justice done right.
I like to say I'm an impartial seeker of the truth. So it's a line that I got through some schooling I took, and I believe in it, though. That's the way we should operate. I try my hard. I'm a human. I make mistakes. I try my best to look at a case objectively and to not get emotions into it. I want facts. I want evidence. I want proof. And I mean, I feel that is the way we should all do our jobs. And I think Wausau PD does a pretty good job of that across the board. If I have a suspect that I start to see through my investigation that it didn't do it, or whatever, or I can clear them, I want to do that, no matter what. And that's where the balancing act comes in.
Yeah.
And the detective side of the house is, doing those things. Having Bill Cole, the lieutenant that was my boss before he retired, had been here for years and years and years. Great detective. One of his lines was, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Sure.
And so.
And you had heard that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so you got it. And that's all part of the job too with the detective. I mean, cops in general. I mean, no one sees the cops because they're having a good day most of the time, right? So you're usually, as an officer, you're still dealing with someone that's angry or upset or, whatever. On the detective side of the house, it gets a little bit more expanded just because now I got to go start seeing friends and family of these people that are already upset, and have those awkward conversations or those hard conversations. So it's a lot.
Yeah, you're balancing a lot: the emotions, the facts, the circumstantial evidence, and the what dids and what did nots, and just trying to prove all of that. So you've been a detective for 2.5 years. You worked CART for 4. Can you boil down for us, I guess, boil down your 9 years into like what has been your crowning moment, or I guess what is your main takeaway for what your life's been the last 9 years working in this community, working for the city of Wausau, working as a law enforcement officer? Like, what is that to you?
Gosh. I think my crowning moment overall, it's an overall of this department's success with the community in general. We have, again, like I said, I know that we have a pretty good relationship with our citizens. We continue to move forward in new policing tactics and techniques and equipment and all that. This department keeps moving forward, and I like to feel that part of that is because I'm one of the many cogs in this department that helps drive that. That's my, like, again, yeah, I work here and I hope to retire here, and I'm not just saying this so that I can keep working here. I really love this place. Like, this is a fun environment to work for. We all have every business, agency, any place you work is going to have their bumps in the road, because it's just the way life is. But this is a great department, and it takes all of us to do what we do here. And so I think that's my thing. I like being a part. I like someone talks about Wausau PD and it's usually a pretty good positive review, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a part of that. Like, that's really cool. So, and there's so many opportunities here. I could retire a detective. I could promote, if I wanted to down the road. So I'm enjoying where I'm at right now, though. So,
Dave, I for one, I'm thrilled to have had this opportunity to sit down with you for well over an hour and a half now, and chat with you about, I guess, who you are, where you come from, why you do the things you do, where you hope to go. I really appreciate the time that you took with us this morning.
Well, thank you for doing this. I know
it was nothing. I had the easy job. You did a really good job of kind of laying everything out really coherently, and I feel like I have a much better sense of who you are. I'm glad to work with you. I'm excited to see what the next 9 years look like for you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for doing this. Now I've got to come back and do this for you.
Is that how that works?
I don't know. Oh, he's awake. We can do that,
he's
right?
Nodding over there. Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been the Wausau Police Department podcast. Stay tuned for more in the future.